and welcome to the latest episode of the Training Science Podcast. I'm pretty excited today to be joined by my very good and longtime friend, JB Morin. We had a nice chat covering a wide range of topics related to his extensive work over the last 20 years. In this episode, I took on a pretty skeptical role to challenge some of his ideas, which in the end turned out to be a great way for him to convince us of their merit. We kicked off our discussion by addressing recent criticism of the force velocity profile, aiming to clarify misconception and explain why these claims may be mistaken. We then delved into the practical application and challenges of implementing the profile in the football world, explaining the potential training outcomes and seeking a middle ground between this cool concept of profiling and its real-world feasibility. Our conversation also touched on resisted sprint training, its application in developing horizontal maximal force production, as well as its role in injury prevention. In the final segment of the chat, we discussed the newly developed acceleration versus speed profiling, examining both the advantage and limitation of this method. Overall, I believe it was an incredible, honest, transparent, and hopefully insightful discussion with someone whose approach and work and as a professional, as a person that I deeply respect. I'm sure you'll enjoy the episode as I did.
Hello and welcome to the Training Science Podcast. I'm Paul Larson.
And I am Martin Buchheit.
And we're excited to be your hosts. Together, we're going to be exploring both the science of training and its application in sport.
We've spent the last 20 years researching and applying the science at the coalface of high-performance sports, from elite clubs, professional athletes, and Olympic programs.
But it's going to be here on the Training Science Podcast that we're going to take that experience and provide you with what my colleague Martin likes to call a no-bullshit approach to how we apply the science in the real world.
And because the context always matters more than the content.
So let's get into today's podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome back on a Training Science Podcast. Today I'm super excited to have my good friend JB Morin with us. JB, how are you?
Hi Martin, I'm great. Very happy to be here.
No, it's awesome, and I think we've been knowing each other for a bit now. I still remember those master studies, that's just telling our age. But when was that? Early 2000s.
Yes, 201.
201. This master in Saint-Etienne actually. So time has flown, but I guess we always kept in touch through different opportunities, and of course the research you've done and conferences. Again, it's a small world. The sports science in France, the world is not that big, and so of course that you were definitely one of the guests I wanted to have on the show. There's a lot of things that I would like to discuss with you. But as always, would you mind just telling us a bit about yourself, and especially what you're doing at the moment?
Yes, so happy to discuss things also with you and with your audience. So I'm a full professor at the University of Saint-Etienne. That's my current job and main job. I'm a director of the sports science department as well. And I am basically leading research projects here at the lab, mostly on sprint mechanics, a bit on injuries. And I have a side activity that is consulting with sports institutions, programs, and everything. So that's pretty busy program.
Yes, and on that, we were discussing that offline, but it looks like we're doing as much in terms of consulting, lectures, workshop. But this is now more or less my main job, where you still have this side job at the uni. So how do you manage that?
I try to keep things, regular. And programmed well. I am programming well, and I am anticipating well. Sometimes it's like a bias, but I think it's useful to have rules. So I'm good at anticipating and programming things, and I hope I can be as efficient as possible to manage everything at the same time. But it's passion overall that drives clearly.
Oh yeah, of course. And the more opportunity you have to also share your work, it's a way to have bigger impact, and I guess that's what we are all looking for or looking after.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
And who do you have to negotiate the most for your trip, the family or the uni?
So I negotiate with my uni. I just ask the permission to have some, consultant external activities. And I think the
Mhm.
uni is pretty happy with that because I respect my first job, and I think I deliver in that first job, so
Mhm.
everyone's happy.
Yes.
And family wise, I negotiate with the same person since the 2000s. And my wife is, I think, pretty happy with everything. I think everything is okay, and I'm very careful about having family time. So when
Yeah.
I'm home, I'm really home, because when I'm away, I'm really away. So that's how it works. Yes.
Yeah. No, good job. Yeah, I tend to apply the same in my context, but sometimes easier said than done. Awesome. Maybe just before we dive into, and I guess like people tuning in the episode, they probably expect we're going to speak a little bit of about speed and profiling, these kind of things. But as we were preparing the episode, send you a few messages the few last days, and yesterday you were on a trail with some of your students, and I thought that would be pretty cool if you can just tell us a little bit about this new initiative you have at the moment at the uni in Saint-Etienne?
Yeah, so basically, as you know, trail running is booming, and you're one of the newcomers to trail running, and I'm happy with that. So we wanted to have a course at the university to better manage train for this very very specific. It's not like running in the mountains; it's very
Mm-hmm.
specific trail running, and we run a university course for our students, and we are going to open that to external students as well. And this course is very very much based on practice. We learn more by just practicing. You can have a 2-hour course on DOMs and the effect of DOMs, or you can take students to some crazy rocks in the mountains so that they have DOMs. And this is totally different type of teaching. I think you know what I mean.
Yes. No, I like the initiative. So what did you do yesterday actually with them?
Yesterday was the last course of the 30 hours of teaching, and it was the long run. So we did something like, it was a 5-hour effort, okay, in the
Mm-hmm.
mountains with a lot of elevation, very very technical paths. And so we went through, and some experienced lack of energy, some experienced being totally low on calories,
Mm-hmm.
despite my recommendations. And so I think we experience a lot of things, and they also experience the mental side of things, of keep on walking, keep on running, despite your mind says, come on, stop. That's really a mistake. And that was very very cool.
Wow, excellent. I remember back in my earliest days as a lecturer at the uni in Amiens, we were trying to do a lot of those practical side, and I
Yes.
remember also taking students to sites visit, football clubs, training, doing some sessions, which unfortunately lacks often, yeah, sometimes into the university program. So I think you're
Yeah,
really
sure.
doing what you preach at the moment.
Many students, I have this sentence in mind that is crazy to me. Many students every year tell me, I know that, whatever it is, but I never did that. And
Yeah.
to me this is a crazy sentence to hear.
Yeah. No, excellent. Super cool. Okay, so as I said, yeah, I think there's definitely a few topics I wanted to touch with you today. And I've been reading the literature. I've been reading a few comments lately about people trying to dismantle a little bit the overall force, speed, force, velocity profiling, these kind of things. And actually, I was eager to hear from you because, of course, there's no one else I would think before you to kind of put us up to speed a little bit about what were those critiques and where they're really founded. Looks like some of them were maybe a bit exaggerated, a bit off the plate. I'd like, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit what were those critiques, and of course that's also an opportunity to give you the opportunity to get back and clarify what's actually right or wrong, and
Yeah.
who should we believe as well, you know?
Yeah, cool. Because it takes time to be clear, because
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of confusion, and today's social media era and so on brings a lot of confusion. So thanks for that. And I might start by saying that if you see the literature over the last century, things have been clear around force and velocity production in many different tasks. And the first works were back in 1920s by Archibald Hill. And everyone has always been okay on the fact that your force output in a given task is really really influenced by the velocity, and so by the load, because the load will influence everything. And so there's a force velocity relationship, and it's been described in many many different tasks, okay, from isolated muscle to single joint to multi joint macroscopic tasks such as running and sprinting. So the first confusion comes from people not making the difference between the different scales. Okay, it's like you talk about oxygen consumption, you can talk about the mitochondria, you can talk about the cell, you can talk about a muscle, and you can talk about the system, and it's always oxygen consumption. So there are different scales. So one of the confusions comes from not comparing the good scales. For example, when people say the macroscopic, our work is mainly on the final step, the macroscopic center of mass force output. So the system force output. Typically, how much force you can push on a pedal, how much force you can push on the ground to move forward your body. And when you say this is not the same as the isolated muscle relationship, so the macroscopic side of things is biased or is, whatever, not valid, you're making a confusion because you're not comparing the same stuff. So this is the first level of confusion. But if you take, for example, a criticism paper in MSSC a few years ago by Martin Bobert, that's exactly the confusion they make. They say because the force-velocity relationship is different between isokinetic testings and running or cycling, the running or cycling force-velocity relationship is not valid. So we should not use this concept. So they mistake the concept for the scale itself. And the second confusion is when people, so the second confusion is pretty recent. It's when people confuse the concept with the methods. And as I said in a tweet, and it's always my pinned tweet, if everyone had force plates and reference method to work, everyone would measure force and velocity, and there would be no FV science is flawed, because you have FV science is flawed coming from this method is sometimes unreliable. You see, so the concept is mixed with the method. And everything came up after Pierre Samosino's works, when we try to have some method that can be used in the field to calculate the force output of the system, where 99% of people cannot do force plate measurements. So it means that people agree with the concept when it's based on force plates. They don't agree with the same concept when it comes from field computations that have been validated against force plates. And so to me, this is the big confusion. It's like if the method has some lack of reliability, you should conclude that the method is not reliable, but you should not conclude that the entire FV concept is biased. When I see some crazy unclear tweets saying FV science is flawed, it's like you say, I don't know, O2 science is flawed or oxygen consumption science is flawed.
Yeah.
Because my oximeter doesn't work correctly. And this is to me one of the main mistakes.
Okay. No, very clear. And maybe a bit further than that, that's also something that I never got really clear. And I think exactly as I think the way you described at the start, like these different levels. And again, I'm going to not only play the naive, but to be honest, I'm not an expert in that. If I take, let's say, a typical force velocity profile using like jumps or like only vertical type of movements, if I'm not mistaking myself, all the force applied, they go vertical. So everything you measure is actually linked to the movement, the output. But again, if you think about a sprint when it's horizontal, there's a portion of that is actually the force you measure is only the horizontal part of it, and then you're missing a lot of the force that is produced to keep hitting the ground that are vertical, right? So my question is, are we actually, because that's maybe sometimes what people believe is that everything that is actually displayed is the production, but actually it's only a portion of that production that we measure, right?
Yeah. So on this point, and it's very important, this is first why you should never discuss a jump question based on sprint data or vice versa. Just a quick comment on the same paper by Bobert. In the same paper by Bobert, they say that the jump FV profile approach and used in training is flawed, and they cite some studies where the word jump is not used. They cite some studies on sprinting. So we should not make this confusion. Now, related to sprinting, in every paper we published, we are clear on the fact that the only force output that we consider is the force output that will drive the center of mass in the forward
Yeah.
So we assume that totally. So when people criticize the method and say there is a flaw because they are ignoring it is totally assumed. So it's not a flaw in itself. It's just that we take the force that is used to accelerate. It doesn't mean we neglect the other type of components because we also calculate them. But it means that we focus only on the effective force. Let's go back to cycling. In cycling, there has been, years of cycling force, velocity, power. Nobody complains. There's no criticisms. Everybody uses it, and that's fine. In cycling, they are not considering the entire force on the pedal. They are only considering the component that drives the pedal because the other component is useless. So in sprinting, we don't say that the vertical component is useless. It's part of the movement. We just say that we focus on the main, in terms of dynamics, on the most important force. I did a very funny video on my Twitter one day. When you skip on place and you push the ground and you produce huge amounts of vertical force, you are not moving. So it means that it's not because there's a lot of newtons that it's important for the movement. And this is something sometimes that we mistake. The classical mistake is to say, there is more Newton vertically than horizontally, so vertical force is more important. Hey, body weight, gravity. When I standing and I'm not moving, there's already 800 Newtons on the ground. So we need to be very careful about what is useful to the movement and what is generated in general. But we always assume that in all of our papers. So I would say that some criticisms reuse our own limitations that we discussed to say, you see, this method has limitations. So it's a bit of an unfair game, I would say.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think, I took this example because that's to me always because I've definitely always trust you on all the concept and all the bigger scale, but more as someone who's trying to understand those tests to profile players.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this guy is actually not very strong, or he's missing this horizontal capacity to produce force. But then the question I had after was, is it a lack of force? Because he might be not be able to produce, or maybe he's able to produce a lot of force vertical, but not horizontally. So those forces are not well oriented. And that's why I thought that having just the VF profile vertically, I would not be able to completely profile to get to my point, whether it's strength or capacity to produce horizontal force.
That's exactly the point. And this is why many people limit the view on this force, and everybody forgets the elephant in the room, that is the orientation, the amount of the orientation of the vector, which is one of the mechanics that we use in the profiling of the guys. And I will give you a very simple example. On the French rugby sevens national team, we had a guy who had a force output capability that was huge. He had the best test at the 1RM, at the press, at the squat jump, and so on. But his horizontal force in sprinting was very low. And there was like a scratching head moment for the physical coaches, because the guy was obviously super strong in terms of non-sprint specific force output, but he had a very, very low transmission capability. And so we worked on some things. We will mention that in resisted sprinting and technical things, which means that both are important, the force output and also the way you orient the push.
Yes, that's exactly where I wanted to take you. So in practice, what kind of test should we use to kind of complement what is missing if we're just looking at the typical profile? You would go for maximal strength test? Any suggestion?
Yeah, so the idea is you want to know the motor capability, so the non-sprint specific force capability. And to do that, you have two options. The 1RM in some classical lower limb tests. So typically my go-to would be estimating correctly the 1RM at the half squat, okay? Because that's lower limb extension using about the same muscle groups and so on. But my second go-to would be the F0, so the theoretical maximum force output in the jump squat exercise, because we had a paper on that. I think it's a bit more, even if it's theoretical, it's a bit more trustable when it's well done than the 1RM. So it tells you what the machine has, and when you compare that to the sprinting force output, it tells you how this is used in the sprint specific conditions. And sometimes you have big surprises, because you have monsters with very low sprint capabilities, and you have like Christophe Lemaitre or some very famous sprinters like André de Grasse, you have some guys with definitely low numbers in terms of non-specific force output. But when it comes to sprinting push-off, they are crazy. One thing to be clear on is the velocity context. When you do your 1RM at the half squat, your center of mass moves around 0.3 meters per second. It's pretty easy to figure out. At the end of the first push of a sprint acceleration or the second push, your center of mass is already 3 meters per second. So it means the push in sprinting is 10 times faster than the maximum push at the squat. So we are not comparing what should be compared.
Okay, but still, to get through this understanding, whether it's the capacity or the ability to produce the force, would you look at the ratio between those two F-zeros or something like that? Because I haven't seen that often,
I love the approach. That would be interesting. But what I look at firstly is directly the sprint data, because the sprint data will tell me the orientation of the push, because we calculate it and it's valid clearly. Or you can, if you don't want to use the Samozino method, you can just look at the force plate science. There's been a lot of force plate data on that. Or you don't do a ratio, but you compare them separately. I'm not a big fan of this type of ratios, because I can have a very low ratio with a super high force or a super low force capability. So the ratios, dividing things to get one number, is sometimes tricky. You know that with any type of ratios.
Yeah.
So I use to compare them, but separately. What is the F0 in sprinting? Okay. And what was the F0 in vertical movements, if you prefer?
Okay, so you benchmark in relation to the group.
Yeah.
And maybe a guy is top 5 in the group in vertical versus horizontal and these kind of things. Yeah.
Exactly. At the very beginning, to tell you the truth, at the very beginning of all of this, I was advising people to not care about the vertical side of things, because we had very low correlations between both F-zeros in trained people.
But that's because that's the technical aspect.
Exactly. But now I tend to say, you need this info anyway, because it will tell you if the guy has or the girl has high or low force output in general, and it's not written on their faces. So you need to know that metric to better think about the puzzle.
No, okay, excellent. Maybe just on that, that's always an interesting question. Your suggestion about one RM, of course, half squats is maybe the kind of the gold standard, and so on. As of course, I guess like in my context, football players, I can't do any type of squats because they don't have neither the technique nor the back and so on. So we are heavy on X bar, trap bar, as a way to kind of have squat movement and having less on the back. And also because I've done a lot of profiling using X bar, but still we have to be very mindful of on one side, the light weights, because we don't really want them to jump. Again, because of the way those guys are built, and the experience with high load is pretty limited. So I would say the range of weight we would use will be in between 50 and 100. So like a lot of points, we can have 3 or 4 points at the middle of the relationship. But light and heavy, we don't go. So I'm also sometimes like, is it really? Because if you're just in the middle, difficult to get a clean profile.
Yeah, I will have a very clear answer on that. You're the father of the 30-15 IFT test. If I tell you that I want to test the maximum aerobic speed of my players, but I don't want them to push the machine too much, your answer will be, hey, sorry, there's nothing we can do. It's exactly the same answer. If you want to assess the maximum force output of the guys, and you tell me we cannot jump with light loads and we cannot push with too heavy loads, I will tell you, yes, indeed, the extrapolation will be very risky. I mean, that's a basic question in testing. Testing the max without going close to the max, it's almost impossible. So I cannot answer that question.
No, we're just acknowledging the limitation from the start. So what I'm using will be the speed at 100 kilos, for example.
Yeah. So if you have the speed at 100 kilos, then you can have the speed at 80 and 60.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You can extrapolate the 1RM.
but the extrapolation is pretty low because I still have guys way above 100, way above 1 or 1.2 meter per second at 100 kilos. So
Yeah,
their max is likely 60, 80, you know.
yeah.
So that's what I meant. But yeah, fair enough. But I mean, I can still, because now back to our discussion about not a ratio, but comparing one or the other, I would say, as we discussed, I think my methodology, whether I'm not able, I'm not saying me, but I guess I'm talking on behalf of a lot of practitioners in football that just can't go heavy. So I would say, as long as we have a proxy of this maximal strength capacity, maybe it's not a proper F0, but it's a speed at a given weight or vice
Mhm.
versa. I can still do my benchmarking. I can still locate a player in between
Yeah,
others, to say if he's stronger than the group, if
yeah.
it's better
I
than nothing.
hope so, but to me, there should be, I'm not aware of that, but there should be a study clearly showing how much information you lose between one point in the relationship, as you do, the velocity
Mhm.
at 100 kilos, and the extremum. I can tell you that if you have two or three guys with the same velocity against 100 kilos at the hex bar, you have a high risk that depending on the
Sure.
other loads, they have very, very big differences in the max. So until we have clear relationship between this single bar metric, that is a good, proxy, as you said, and the 1RM that you extrapolate, I would be very careful because, that's exactly what we show in our 1RM paper. We have people with the same 1RM and with very different extrapolated velocity at lower loads because they have different load velocity relationships. That's the big issue.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. We still use a few points, but they will be just close to each other. They will be in the middle
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
relationship.
yeah.
But no, but fair enough. Okay, so that's one part of this assessment, more this vertical maximal force. So now back to the profiling, the speed, and getting the horizontal. And as I said, I get the idea of having both to have an understanding where the that might be missing. Let's say the limitation I have, exactly as the limitation I just described now to test maximal strength vertically. The limitation I have is that often in the football context, we find it difficult to have a proper max sprint. When I said max, it's not about touching max speed, because this is something we do very often, especially with all now the literature, and we've both been part of that. The sprinting
Yeah.
vaccine might be exaggerated, but the prophylactic aspect
Yeah.
of touching max speed. So what we say, the common practice now is touching max speed, GPS 90, 95%, and so on, but very less frequently from a maximal acceleration. So most of the time, it's
Mm.
touching max speed playing football, and we're happy with this, or top-ups, and then it's just more like flying, touching, as a way to let the players manage. Because you're always a bit in like you're walking on eggs, you don't want to push them too much, you don't know. So I would say a proper maximal sprint starting from zero with a strong acceleration, we don't have that often. So just for that simple reason, I don't have many sprints, whether it's monitor with the, I think that's a good point. I'm sorry, it's a long, I talk a
No.
lot before I let you, but I would always push to have GPSs to get those measurements, just because it's easier, so I can get the whole squad and so on. So there might be a bit of a limitation on the technology, even though GPSs have been shown to be not too bad, for this kind of assessment. But it's more the lack of opportunity to have a proper full Mach sprinting speed. So that's where I am at the moment in this process of evaluating the profile.
Yeah. So I understand that well. I think it's a very soccer football specific discussion because in some other sports like American football or rugby, full accelerations from almost zero is part of the game, which is absolutely not the case in football, in soccer, very rarely. So I agree with that. And I agree with the fact that, as you said, it's very good to let the guys organize themselves to get what you want, which is a high speed, close to max. I'm a very big fan of 90% well managed, but not, pushing the VMAX. It's a street race, very ugly mechanics button, but that's another discussion. Now, in terms of initial acceleration, that's the problem with this entire profile thing, is that if you want to have the metrics and use them, then the test will require this type of task. So even if it's not a specific task, the metrics might be useful, but to get them, you have this specific task to run. And it's exactly the opposite problem for big guys in basketball. and big guys frontline in rugby. They are super tall and super heavy, and they never sprint up to their top speed. So the coaches say exactly the same as you do, as you say. We are very, very much on the initial acceleration with these guys, but for them, running to top speed, it takes 20, maybe 25 meters. It's like a marathon. So we do not do the test, and I have always the same answer. If you want the metrics to work on them, even if it's initial sprint metrics, that's the limitation of the method. To get the info on the first part of the sprint, you need to do the entire sprint. So here, I think the answer is it depends on what you want to get. If you want to, not use this type of metrics, then yes, you don't need a full gas initial acceleration. There is still another complementary part of the answer is that even if they never do initial 5 meters from zero, the stimulus and the way you develop the initial force output might still be interesting to me in terms of training, because on the pitch, when you will need to do a COD, when you will need to reaccelerate from a crouch position or whatever, or a change in ball possession, like an interception, whatever, you will need these initial first meters, and you need to specifically train for them. So that could be part of the buy-in you can get.
Yeah, but in this case, there will be a day you work on axles and another day you work on peak speed, but not working on both together.
Maybe. Yeah.
But fair enough. I mean, and of course, I think the discussion is going exactly as I wish, in terms of the limitation and so on. But I would say now, in my context, I might still be able to slowly build up this habit and get to the point of having those maximal sprint from starting from zero to get the profile. I mean, it's not the usual habits and the way we do it, but now if I was convinced that having all those data in the end will improve the program, I would find a way to do it. And this is where I need your input as well, to kind of convince me that is worth the friction. Every time you do something new in terms of testing, you have to make sure that the outcome of this testing is going to improve your program.
Yeah, sure.
And at the moment, I'm still maybe sometimes a bit unclear about the benefit of having this information, because as I said, most of the time, I never had this information yet for the reason I explained, or I played with that with individual players coming from rehab, because then in this case, you can do with a rehab player, you do more or less what you believe is good. There's less context. And so I would say at the moment, I'm still unsure that even if I had this perfect profiling, I would be really in position to change the things in my program. Because I think it's really nice if I could say, okay, this guy is really missing some acceleration capacity or transfer horizontal force, or this guy is missing. I mean, it's nice when you think about profiling the players. But in practice, I would say everyone works on axle, everyone works on peak speed, everyone works on peak speed for the prevention side of the thing. Everyone works on axle because I believe everyone will benefit to be better on axles. So even though the profile might be different, at the moment, I will still train more or less everyone in the same way,
Yeah.
So it's nice, but not immediately impacting the program. Again, in my football context, maybe in other sport, they have time to develop and so on, which might be different.
Yeah. So I totally get the point. One thing before my answer on the performance side of things is that we have a full cohort study in soccer football players, and we have some unpublished data clearly showing that the maximum force output in sprinting, because of how the hamstrings function, is a red flag, is a part of the puzzle for players for hamstring injuries. Which means that if you know that metric and it's pretty low, then you have an idea about, that's one part of the puzzle for the player in prospective terms. But in terms of performance, you have
maybe if you don't mind, just on the injury side of the things, I guess it's related to maybe also a bigger pelvic tilt and strength of the hamstring, or what would be? So are you able to get the same information without this F0?
No.
Or it's really something specific that stand out?
The pelvic tilt and the new score by Chris Brahma, the sprint score about the posture, is related to what I call the microscopic strain in the hamstrings. The way you run and the way your pelvis is positioned and so on is influencing the stretch and so the strain in hamstring. So that's one part of the puzzle. But the other part of the puzzle is the maximum force output in sprinting. So there are two different metrics. They are not related. And you can have a good posture that is, let's say, safer, theoretically, and
Yep.
a good or a low maximum force output. And in our cohort study, we only focused on the force output. But to tell you the truth, we are going to reanalyze the video data that we have at full speed to rerun the stats on the cohort now based on the kinematic index. So that's two different types of information. So let's go back to training. I think that when people criticize the use of the FV profile in sprinting, they say it's a bit complex. Exactly what you said. We don't have enough, arguments to implement that. I think for 70-80% of the cases, they are right. And sometimes I say to coaches, don't bother, just train everyone the same, do a bit of everything, cover the entire spectrum, do some low speed sprints with resistances, do some intermediate stuff, and do some maximum speed, and you will cover the entire spectrum and you will get results. And all the models we published so far show that about 70%, very roughly, 70% of the final performance on a 5, 10, 30-meter sprint is related to the maximum power output. And whatever you do in training, if you push the maximum power output, you will get some results. Now, the thing is that for the 30% that are remaining, using the FV profile and trying to see where is the weak points and where is the weak chain, the weak link in the chain, can help you cover this final 30% in performance. And this is where we think that it can help you individualize a bit more the approach. But you can still do a very good job up to some point by using a very general approach that stimulates everything in the profile. The problem is that with some players, this approach will not work very well. And with some players, you're going to miss the main point because maybe you will address some points in the profile that are well developed and you don't know it. And you will miss the fact that they would have maybe proved better if you switched a bit. We do not say it's black or white, but it's in the clubs who implement this approach. They have, for example, one session that is general to all the players, and they have a second session where they try to nuance a bit individually. But again, I don't say everyone should use the profile and individualize approach. I just say there's going to be a margin of improvement here. And we can do the analogy. Sorry, long question, long answer.
No, it's
We can
perfect.
analogy with high intensity training and with aerobic training. You can do a very general type of training and not bother too much on the individual threshold, the lactate measurement and everything, and you will do well most of the time. But if you want to go a bit deeper and be more, individual specific, that might be some extra type of information to bring you the last 20-30% that will match with every individual's profile. There has been some rugby teams and there has been some American football programs in the US doing that extra individual type of training to nuance a bit the general type of conditioning for speed. And for the rugby side of things, we have results and we will publish that. In both sides of things, both the players and the coaches were pretty happy with how it turned out. So that's the point.
Yeah, no, very good. And of course, that's exactly, I think, where it has a place, irrespective of the context, those individual training program, these kind of things. Comment I have on that is how much is really needed to be able to develop those maybe individual gaps. If I take the example, and you took it, so it's perfect. That's even you suggested the topic about high intensity interval training. We know that in 4 to 6 sessions of 10-12 minutes, you can improve your maximal aerobic speed by half to even 1 kilometer. So the dose is very small for a good benefit. In your experience, what is the dose? If now someone has a deficit in one side or the other of the spectrum, how much is the work required to really get those improvements?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because what we see in our study and in our practice, so we did a lot so far on the force side of the profile, trying to improve those with a lack of maximum force output. we didn't work much on the velocity side of things for many reasons. But on the force side of things, we see that if the programming is well done, because if you're not targeting specifically, then you will not stimulate and not develop. But if you do things correctly, after something like that, 4 sessions of, let's say on average, 5 to 10 reps, you already see some improvements. And most of them are related to coordination, better coordinations, all that stuff. And you see some improvements. We have typically some 8 weeks type of programming, and mid-program, we already see some changes.
So these are changes on the F0 of the horizontal profile,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the exercise that would be part of that would be, what would be the proportion between generic strength development versus very horizontally targeted force application? Would be a percentage split?
So in our studies, we went specific because in my opinion, there's no reason to not go specific as a first intent. Because if you tell me we're going to work on squat force because we think about a transfer to sprint force, I will tell you, look at transfer later, work on sprint specific force first. So we went always on the horizontal type of resistance as a first type of approach.
Okay, so that's maybe the segue to another topic I wanted to take you through. Is it mainly resisted sprint training? That's mainly when you think about this kind of work, or just like a hip thrust and all those other gym exercises? It's a mix of everything, I guess.
Yeah, so that I call that sprint specific resistance training. And yes, if you think velocity based training and you want to stimulate the good part of the spectrum, you want to have some resistances that put your athlete in the good part of the spectrum. And people do not understand that enough, to my opinion, because let's say that you want to develop my squat maximum strength. You will never let me do some squats with a 20 kilo bars. That wouldn't make sense because it's not specific to the load and to the velocity you want to develop. So we have the exact same approach in sprinting. You want to develop the force side of the spectrum. You want to have resistances, whatever the type and the modality, that make your athlete push, but not too fast. Because if you push too fast, then you're not developing the force side of things. So we went very specific. And of course, this type of load scheme will be high loads with everything that comes with it, progressivity, familiarization, and so on. But definitely, if you work with parachutes or light loads, you will not be specific to the part of the profile you want to develop.
And in your experience, what would be the typical load that are, well, because I've of course I've read all the stuff you've done. Who was that? Matt
Cross. Yeah.
Matt Cross, yes, when you started really the heavy sprint sled and so on. And there's been a lot of resistance because, as you know how it is, you guys publish something because it's coming from you. I'm also super biased. I'm like, this is good stuff. And then I'm trying to implement that to talk to people around me. And they're like, no, but this is too heavy, blah, 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 technique, coordination. So people are like just impossible. And my arguments are those you just mentioned, but we're developing strength. We're not developing technique right now. And the technique, keep it for after, So those papers were published now 5-6 years ago, even more. So where are we now into this both implementation, acceptation of those heavier load, and how much is enough and how much is too heavy?
So there's two things. There's the academic literature and there's practice. And in terms of practice, I can tell you in my experience that I have never seen any group in any sport starting to implement that correctly and moving backwards, telling me, well, we dropped that because it's useless. So we've seen a lot of, positive results. And if I take the example of French athletics, 10 years ago, when I presented all that stuff, the coaches were very reluctant. I mean, for all the arguments you said, it will slow them down. They did not understand that we were developing something very specific, acceleration force. Today, they are really asking to use the 1080 a lot. They are, you see what I mean? They have changed their mind. Now, in the literature, now the results, we are doing now a meta-analysis on that. And the results are pretty clear. We see some improvements when it's done correctly in the rules of training. And so typically, if your athlete's maximum speed is 9 meters per second, and you divide the spectrum into 3 zones, maximum force to maximum velocity, the maximum force zone will begin at 3 meters per second. So I would say that it's not the load in terms of kilogram or person body mass. It's any load with which the player will be comfortable to produce a running type of effort below 3 meters.
Slower. Yes. Okay.
Anything that will be faster will stimulate something else. I would
Okay.
approach things like that.
And it's very simple and I like it. So just for me now to put numbers into perspective, because I'm now a more and more frequent user of the 1080. We even bought one in Optimo, the clinic I'm working in Estepona. Like for a 75 kilo football player, what would be the load you would need to use to get
Yeah,
through max? So the intent will be to go full speed, but it will
exactly.
be only moving at 3 meters per second.
Exactly. So the good point with the 1080 machine is that it has an iso velocity mode. And so
Yes.
you set the speed and the motor will adjust the load so to get you what you want. So this is great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now let's say that this guy, the only way to know it will be to do a little test for this guy, a load velocity test, just asking them to do 3 sprints with 3 different
Yes.
loads, and you will draw his individual profile, and then you can recalculate everything. So typically, in my experience, if I take myself, if I want to run at 3 meters per second with the 1080, that's going to be a 18, 20 kilogram load. But maybe for you, it will be 5 kilogram different. And this is what you
Yeah.
need to know. If you want to program things correctly, you need to know how every individual behaves against the load. And we are all different in that.
Yes. This kind of, well, in my experience, I never managed to put players with more than 10, 12 kilos. Just even you have to build that and so on. So I was probably more doing some power type of training than strength.
Middle part of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. But if I was now able to get more load and so on, as everything you have to build it up and so on, you would approach this really as one exercise that will be part of a maximal strength session. So same number of reps, recovery, volume, and so on.
Definitely. That's specific type of resistance. It is not running. It's not a running type of training. It's a resistance type of training. So I would consider that exactly as some half squats or press exercises. It's very taxing mentally, mechanically, but it's a stimulus. So this is what you want for adaptation.
Yeah, and also the length of the run would be pretty short because if you think about maximal strength, I don't know, you would go 5-6 reps
Mhm.
max, and then you're not on maximal strength anymore, so there will be a few steps only.
Absolutely. So to tell you the truth, just before our interview, I had time with my PhD student, Edson Silva, is doing a full study on all that stuff. And we saw a very clear correlation between the max velocity you reach against various loads and the distance this max velocity is reached. And for example, with the heaviest load we used, we reached the top speed within 10 to 15 meters. And so if you know that, then you can regulate that. My go-to in practice is the quality. If the sprint quality is getting lower and the speed starts to decrease, then you stop and that's your distance.
Yeah,
So typically
but
for a 12 kilogram sprint, you can consider that you're not running beyond 15 meters, let's say.
yeah, but you get my point about the number of steps as number of repetitions.
Yeah.
So if I go strength 5 reps, okay, let's do 5 steps.
No, I wouldn't go that far because of if again if you push at the half squat and it's heavy, the speed of the movement is still very 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 low compared to the 3 meters per second we were discussing. So I would not make this direct analogy in terms of reps and steps. I would make the analogy in terms of sets and number of sprints. You see what I mean?
Okay.
Yes. Let's say if I do 6 sets of X reps in squat, that would correspond to 6 sprints.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is still very theoretical for me because I have it very clear on my end, but never got the chance to go that far with players, irrespective of the context. And again, maybe if I had been working in rugby, maybe that would have been easier for me to experience it myself with athletes, with players. But
One thing that
okay.
people should keep in mind is that it's how do I say that the dose, the volume, the numbers, we tend to underestimate them. So sometimes a session with only 2 sprints, if you do that twice a week For many
Yes.
players, that might be enough. It should not be considered as unresisted sprints. You're not
Yeah.
doing like a 10 times 30 in a week, loaded and unloaded. So we just keep that in mind in terms of time of effort.
Yeah. No, I'm completely with you. Also, yeah, and last one on the resisted sprints. I've been putting that as part of the injury prevention puzzle posterior chain, also as a way sometime to, well, of course, to have a variation in the stimulus for maybe posterior chain, but also a way sometime like trying congested back from an away game. Players have not touched high speed for a while, but they might be tired. So I was like, okay, maybe that's the way we can have some high forces development without hopefully taking as many risks if there will be a risk. So I would, instead of having max speed exposure, I would have resisted sprint in this case as a way to balance the risk.
I totally agree because, contrary to what many people think, for the hamstrings, resisted sprinting is much less, I think, strainful than unresisted sprinting. So you can have a good sprint stimulus with a bit of load, and you will have less strain in the hamstrings because you have less, velocity, stretch, and so on. I think that's a good point. Stimulate without facing the high strains of full speed that you really need to be ready for that window of strain. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, I'm glad I get the green
Mhm.
the green tick
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
from the master.
Makes sense.
Okay, yeah. The last topic I wanted to discuss with you, actually, by the way, just on the resist sprint, maybe no. I've just now just I like when I say published, it's a funny way to put that because that's on Sport Performance Science and Reports. So publication, it's another story, but keep that for another one. But so I just you get it published, put it out. A very like simple analysis we've done about deceleration during games. And of course, off the back of those analysis of deceleration, of course, this is now opening the work we want to do again with the 1080 on decels, so that we can not only measure them, but make sure we can slowly overload those decels and so on. Have you any more experience with that and the channel direction of the things and so on?
No, not much, except that to me, the 1080 is one of the devices that will help you, dig deeper. The very big problem of the deceleration part of things is that, of course, it's very important. If you don't have good brakes, maybe your system will not accelerate all out. That's a very key question. The problem is that when you accelerate and you ask an all out effort, you know that if the players do it, they are all out. When you decelerate, the all-out deceleration is something very, very unclear, and you never know the amount of intensity that they have provided. And this is why, and this is opening maybe a connection to the in situ approach of things. This is why the future data of field deceleration speed that the guys at GPXA and myself are preparing will be very interesting. So I think it's key, but I think that the metric and the conditions and the intensity that the players put in the decel exercise is very, very difficult to normalize and to follow.
And always very context dependent on the field, because you don't have to decelerate maximally as long as you're still in position and so on. So the way I see we're going to start to use it, and all the ideas we have now developed in that's those stuff we were doing at Optimo, is really through more having a good training tool and a way to train and control the training. At
Exactly.
least,
The first
testing is something different.
studies on deceleration, their main objective was to standardize, normalize the way deceleration was performed and measured, which tells that's a difficulty. When you ask accelerations, you don't do that. You just say start from zero, boom, all out, and you have it.
Exactly. So there's more to come, more to discover on that.
But I love this.
Okay.
If you don't have good brakes, your system maybe will not have good acceleration because it knows the brakes are not good. Let's put it.
That's a good point to put it. As I said, last topic I wanted to touch with you more on the monitoring side of the things, and transitioning to the acceleration speed profile. I think of course you're the kind of the one starting with this, and now there's a lot of people that have actually followed that. So There was, of course, Pauline Clavel that we coordinated her PhD at the end with all the difficulties that she had in this time in Paris. There's a few other teams that have worked on that as well, even without you, I think. Yeah, I can't remember all the different teams, but there's Andres that is now with the national Mexican team. He's published a few studies on that. You were involved in his papers?
No.
Okay, so that's cool. So when you see other teams actually, yeah.
I was involved in some papers indirectly in the review process, but it's a kind of involvement. I mean, if you want to track what's happening in science, yes, but no, not directly.
Yes, but yeah, so funny because I've had a chat recently with Andres Lopez Segara, if I'm not mistaken, and he's full on with this on his PhD. And as you know, I've been as well a little bit critical about the approach, and that's what I'd like to discuss with you now. But it's funny when people are reaching out because they've seen me on this paper with Pauline, and like, it's so good, let's work on that. And I'm more like, by the way, I have some reserve, so it's been funny. So maybe starting from you, can you just, for those who are not really aware of this ID, can you just summarize a little bit and tell us what's the ID first, and then we can dive and dissect later.
Yeah, so the ID came when people figured out that testing the force output capabilities and the acceleration and speed was sometimes a challenge. And we came up with the idea that if you collect all the movement data of a football player during the games and the training, you have a cloud of data. If you plot the acceleration against the running velocity, you have a cloud of data that looks a bit like a triangle, which is logical because you know that when you run slow, you can accelerate very, very strong. But when you run fast, you cannot anymore. That football would be crazy, but that's a decreasing trend. And if the measurement is correct, which is a big if, you have a linear decrease between your maximum acceleration capability and every velocity from very low, like walking, to your maximum speed. And in theory, when you're running at your maximum speed, your acceleration capability is zero because you're plateauing. And so from that, we build that shape and we analyze, we explore that profile again.
Yeah, just to make sure everyone understand the methodology behind that. So that's GPS driven data that you collect all the time, every session. And then each dot is the actual speed and level of acceleration of a given run.
Yeah.
Right. So from the same run, you take those two variables each time, right?
No, it's not from the same run. So we take the entire cloud of data and we say from, let's say, walking 3 meters per second, because everything below is just, repositioning, it's not movement. So from 3 meters per second to your maximum speed, I'm going to take every 0.2 or every 0.5 meters per second. And throughout your week, your 2 weeks, or your game, I'm going to pick for this running velocity, what was your maximum acceleration possible in any type of game? Because if I'm running at 5 meters per second and I'm doing a little acceleration, you will neglect this point. But the moment in my week I was running at 5 and I pushed my maximum acceleration, boom, you're going to take this one to build the relationship. So it's a composite profile. It's about you when you're moving on the pitch at every possible velocity down the spectrum. What was your system maximum acceleration? And so to summarize things correctly, if you do a single sprint from 0 to top speed, and your maximum intensity is there, normally you build a profile that is your maximum profile because every step down the acceleration, you're giving your max acceleration.
So the acceleration at a given speed.
Yeah. And very important, the acceleration that is related to your change of speed, not related to the shock in your accelerometer. I have some...
Of course.
Because when you run at full speed, your running acceleration is 0, but you're bouncing the ground so hard that if you have a GPS unit with an accelerometer, it will record crazy accelerations. So that's the acceleration related to the change in velocity.
It's a locomotor type of acceleration. But I think people have been confusing this for forever.
Yeah.
We talk about movement. Oh yeah, fair enough. Okay, so that's for the concept, and then I think at least I can talk more about what Pauline has done because I've been involved in the PhDs and so on. And I think again, if I'm trying to as we discussed the other points, like I think I like the approach, the theory, and everything sounds. I think the idea is excellent, But from some of her results, we kind of found that this profile was really affected by the type of runs that were included in the profile, whether for some weeks they were opening the field and having some maximal sprints, and other weeks the training content were different. Players were not exposed to those max sprints, so that the profile was affected. And this is where that's a bit of a pity, because then it becomes training content dependent, and then we don't really know if the profile becomes not less player dependent or status, fitness, fatigue dependent, but training content dependent. And this is where I left it kind of on my side.
Yeah. So to me, that's exactly the both the interesting part and the limitation part of macroscopic items, macroscopic metrics. Let's take the analogy. I really like to do analogies between biomechanical concepts, especially new ones, because the AS in situ is very new, and the existing physiological context. Let's talk about heart rate variability, because to me that's about the same thing. Heart rate variability, you have many ways to measure it incorrectly, and you know it. So that's exactly the same as the GPS quality and so on. And it's so macroscopic that it can change depending on your infectious status, depending on many other things than the training that you did and so on. So, and it doesn't mean that we dump the HRV. It means that, wow, it's a bit more complex and it takes into account many more things that we think initially. So we have to play around that. You see what I mean? So to me, the in situ profile should be interpreted within a context. It's just a way to have, I think, easily, because now you should cite the works of the INSEP guys who published a platform to analyze a bit better the data. And so it's pretty easy to get, but you can misinterpret it totally if you're not integrating the context with it. So that could be seen as a limitation of the concept. I see it more as a caution you have to use.
Yes. No, of course, you have to know the limits if not, you just can't interpret the data correctly. But I would say as soon as the profile becomes dependent on the content of the sessions, what's left.
Yeah. I agree. This is why when you want to compare what's comparable, like pre-post injuries, you want to make sure that the data that form the cloud come from very similar and comparable, so you can standardize, game sessions. Yeah, totally agree. It depends also on the game, like the opponents or the coach philosophy for that game that might be totally different from another game and so on. So there's plenty of, it might be too macroscopic, but initially when we had the proof of concept paper, we just said to people, look, that's maybe a good way to bring something new. Let's play with it. And I definitely think that there will be some arguments in favor, of, wow, that's too messy. The only thing I care about is that the methods are correct. Because if the methods are not correct, then you open a new door for unnecessary questions. But let's say that the methods are correct. I agree that it could be very influenced by many factors.
Okay. No, that's what I wanted.
Sorry, Martin, but as you said, the content could influence the profile, but I could reverse this argument and say the profile will help describe the effect of the content. Let's say that you have a coach that thinks that this type of training works on the initial acceleration in an integrated type of training. Then you should see it in the profile of these sessions. And if you do, you confirm the coach orientation. And if you don't, then you say, look, we think it is not the case. But that could be seen as the other way around. If it's connected to the content, it could be a descriptor of the effect of the training content.
Yes, I would say I see it more on that side as an additional external load metric rather than profiling players or invisible monitoring, which was again at the start the excellent idea, of course, to have this individual monitoring. But yes. But now
initially, the aim, I think, of this concept was not to induce some training recommendations. It was more to describe a bit more specifically the locomotor behavior of players.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now makes sense. But anyway, this is so too much. Sorry, this is still to me innovation. And again, congrats on still being innovative on something something that can still be useful at all levels. So
Yeah.
again, that's also research, and having an idea, testing the idea. Sometimes everything is perfect, sometimes not,
Yeah.
and then having always option to refine things. So that's great. That's really
That's
cool.
the part of my job that I prefer. I mean, in 10 years from now, from our discussion, in 10 years, maybe nobody will use it anymore. And maybe some clubs it will be a game changer. We don't know. But instead of, criticizing the past, which is sometimes helpful, I prefer to push things and let's say what comes up.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's too good. Okay, so I think we're way above the hour, but I'm super happy with the chat, and I think there's so many more things we could discuss. But I think I really wanted to have you for all the topics, but especially to give you this opportunity as well, like the first part, because you get those papers criticizing your work, and you're my friend, so I'm not like that, So having this opportunity to let you do yourself justice a little bit, I think it's there was a part of the podcast I wanted to read you to have. So
and I'm happy because it's in the short-term format, but
yes.
all the people listening should know that we are preparing some proper, written long-term answers. We prefer to take time to be clear in our answers. Of course, academia name will answer. Yeah.
Awesome. That's cool. Okay. Anything to add?
No. I'm super happy that we took this time, and I think it helps clarify things, because sometimes not only because of the English, but sometimes in the papers, because of the format and everything, you cannot go that deep. I mean, if you put our discussion into a paper, that would be a 20-page paper. Sometimes you're not clear. When people confuse, it's also because maybe you did not explain clearly. So I'm very happy I could do that today.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So what's next for you in the next couple of weeks, months?
The end of the academic year and the beginning of research year, we have some cool data coming up with motionless capture systems, comparisons of methods, and so on. And this loaded sprint study that is now the PhD students are waiting for this.
Super. Well, I'll be waiting to hear from you and see all the results as always. Excellent. Okay. Thanks again for joining me, and on behalf of Paul and myself, really wanted to thank you for your time and everything you've done and sharing everything. So thank you. Thanks a lot, and see you soon.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Hey there, training science enthusiasts. If you like what you just heard, be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at HIIT Science to keep up with our latest. And if you want to take your knowledge to the next level, visit our website to check out our full online course and textbook on the science and application of high-intensity interval training. Now, if you're a university, club, or sports organization, we've got special packages available for you and your team. Just contact us at info@hitscience.com. And if you want to join our evolution as a field and take your application even further, be sure to check out the HIIT Science technology platform, Athletica. Visit athletica.ai or follow us on Instagram and Twitter at athletica_AI. Thanks for listening.